it really is to do and what it's like to be an activist. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great. And Pitia?
Hi, my name is Pitia Modi. I was born in Amman, Jordan. I immigrated to Thunder Bay from Cairo, Egypt, and I'm a third-year psychology student at the University of Windsor, and I am part of the BLM Thunder Bay chapter as well.
Awesome. So thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists for being here with us today. It is super exciting to have so many people come from different Northern communities, which is really awesome. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start a really nice open discussion on racism in the North. So the first question that I want us to talk about is, based on our own lived experience in the North, how have we seen racial paradigm transform, evolve, or regress within whatever span of time you've been in the North, whether it's your lifetime or the past couple of years? I myself, I know I'm from Brampton, Ontario, and I've been in Sudbury for about 7 years, so it might be a short experience in some, but what do you guys think? Yacine, do you want to go first?
Sure. I can generally say I've seen the racial paradigm do all three. So in terms of evolving, I think that it has evolved in that now when we speak of racism in the North, we acknowledge that it is not something that is non-existent. It is here, it is present, and it is an experience lived. And also now when we talk of racism in the North, we genuinely understand the individuals, associations of the BIPOC communities as being able and as being the main drivers that can make a change in our communities when we talk of racism. And in terms of transformation, I think that it has transformed its ability to include more voices and to acknowledge many experiences as a result of being from different identities. So now when we talk of racism in the North, we acknowledge that it is not just a race or gender issue, but it also encompasses other issues and concepts such as class, sexuality. So now what we see is women and members of our Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus communities at the forefront and at the top of organizing, and it's beautiful to see. However, when I look at the fact that Black BIPOC communities, associations, and individuals have been here doing this work, are here, and will continue to be here. They are seen, but they are seen, but are they looked at, or are they truly seen, right? They are heard, but are they listened to, or are they just heard? And they're told they matter, but what action or what steps are carried out in favor of them to prove that? So when I think of that, I kind of question and ask, are we fighting the very same fight that our forefathers and foremothers have when we speak of racism and Black activism? Or is it just the same questions being formulated in a different way? So in that sense, that's when I think of regression.
No, definitely that makes a lot of sense, because for sure we're seeing a lot of the same battles still happening in society. Vijanti?
Sure. So what I've seen is, due to the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these other movements, some organizations who would actually have had a mandate written that maybe they did a portion of their work to eliminate barriers for people to settle, or to eliminate barriers to work, that now they're doing a little bit more. They're acknowledging that, they're maybe looking for funding proposals, they're actually doing new projects. So I feel like it's slowly moving forward, that people are acknowledging that they're trying to eliminate barriers. But I've seen pushback. Now that we can name the problem, that there is racism, that there is racial prejudice and other types of discrimination, there's also a silence. So, is everyone in the community, doing all that personal work to understand all of these issues? And so if they're not, they're maybe not ready to talk about it. So we find that like a stalemate sometimes. So we do understand that there's, the North wants immigrants to come and settle. It's an economic drive. But are they providing all of the supports for people to feel welcome, and so, Equity and Inclusion North Bay, we're all about trying to have more education opportunities. Black Lives Matter Sudbury is doing that right now. So really the question for us is to also see, well, how can we get the whole community ready to engage in these kind of conversations? Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
No, great. Thank you for your contribution. Zachariah?
Through my experience in like Thunder Bay is pretty notorious for being one of the most racist cities in Canada. And, so I've been here, I've raised, and I've seen a very slow evolution, but it's, going into the right direction. However, there's definitely still that pushback. A lot of people, if you bring it up, they don't really want to look at themselves. They kind of like, they negate it to the States or whatever, considering we're very close in proximity, 45 minutes. So everybody's like, well, we're not too bad. But after the events last year with the George Floyd incident, and that really sparked like a lot of conversations, and especially within my community and within my friend groups and everything. And sometimes there was times where they could get heated, and there was other times where people were more eager to understand. And a lot of people were like trying to learn a bit more, but then I saw again there was more pushback and for a little bit a stalemate. But as time goes on, you start to see again the eagerness and the understanding, and people just want to be like educated. And I guess like for this to like continue and like to help like change that problem is like education and communication is like key, because like it starts with like people understanding the struggles of people of color in this in the regions. And after last year's events, people started to listen more, and they started to care more, and conversations started to spark. And sometimes it's not the easiest conversation, but it's necessary, and people started to reach out and they wanted to learn. And you could, it's not going to change overnight, but it started somewhere, and I'm definitely seeing it go into the right direction. Obviously slow, but it's better than nothing.
No,
Yeah.
Definitely. I agree. And just to touch on the piece you were saying about, a lot of times we hear folks say, we're not as bad as the States. And it's like, it's a really important thing for us to recognize as a society that even if we don't have necessarily as much blatant or out there racism that is being advertised in Canada, we definitely still have a huge racist culture embedded within our institutions and within our society. So it's like really important for us to reconcile with that and recognize that. So I'm really appreciative for you for bringing that up. Pitia?
Hi. So in my opinion, I think that all the events that occurred last year, I think George Floyd mainly, it acted as sort of a catalyst to people, and it made people open up their minds and see that, oh, there's really like these issues going on. Because especially in my community, there's a lot of people that didn't see racism as an issue. They just seen it going on in other countries, but even though it's very real here in Canada as well. And also, I've seen racism transform with the increase in modern technology and people's access to just their laptops, cell phones, and any other smart devices. And all of these devices, they're all cross-compatible with like multiple different social media sites where there's a lot of like divide that exists and targeting individuals of color. And these social media sites such as Instagram, Twitter, etc. There's individuals on them using them who feed into and promote stereotypes, false narratives, and they also encourage other people to join in acts of being prejudiced and arrogant about racism, which is a prevalent issue. And especially because of the fact that people are being essentially protected behind a screen, as well as their identity, in which they feel more entitled to post and write about harmful messages and offensive photos as well. And the only regression I've seen is in there's less verbal racism going on because of everything that's been going on and transpiring recently, with everything being posted on social media. It's right in everybody's faces. And also, I also think people are starting to understand things that they were uneducated about before because of all these events that are going on right now, understanding about even about different types of micro racism, things that people were doing on a daily basis that they weren't aware of before. So yeah.
No, definitely. And I think in touching on the social media, I just want to ask our panelists another like impromptu question. But seeing how social media has transcended into society and how we've started to develop to adapt towards, and how it helps us as activists, but also works counteractive to us, how do we think that social media in itself and access to the internet has affected the movement, or whether it's Black Lives Matter, but activism in general? If anyone wants to chip in on that one. I know it's a big loaded question.
Well, I think that especially right now, being in a pandemic, it's a way that people can still be engaged. So I know there's downfalls with really negative people, but then on the other hand, for instance, this webinar is going to be on Facebook and it will reach so many more people because of that. And people can watch it when they are ready to watch it. They don't just have to watch it live. So I think there's positive points and negative points.
No, definitely. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
So for like to add on to that, I think like social media is really like added like a magnifying glass on this. It's like expanded like what's going on, and especially like with the pandemic going on. I found that last year, because everybody's just sitting at home on their phones all day long, when they saw the George Floyd events, like that really, the reason like it got so much like attention is because everybody was just sitting around. And I had teammates for hockey who were they're from Latvia, and they were messaging me and they're like, hey, what is this George Floyd stuff going on in North America? And I started like informing them, and it got me thinking. I was like, this reached like all over the world, and people are starting to ask, and these conversations are starting. So it's like there's a big like, it's a definite game changer. It's a big plus. And like, obviously there's times where social media can be very harmful, but at the end of the day, it's, if we use it in the right format, it's a good way to like educate and converse with one another.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think social media is like a really big, like powerful tool that we have right now that could also be a really big downfall at the same time, just because of how big of an audience social media can reach. And just using social media in the right way, we could reach people that you wouldn't even be able to sit down with and have conversations with, just like around the world. It just spreads like the message and has people more aware of like the situations going on, not only in their community, but in other communities. And I think social media could help create more of like a unity if it's used right and the messages come across.
No, definitely. I definitely think that the use of social media gives people less of an out, if that makes sense. Because I recall when I first came to Sudbury, there was folks, because Sudbury is a predominantly white community, but we have an incredibly diverse population that lives here. And I remember coming here and people saying, well, I've only ever had one Black classmate, or I grew up in an all white neighborhood. And that was their excuse for being prejudiced or saying things that were discriminatory or for falling to stereotypes. And now it's like, you have zero out. Social media makes things accessible to everybody. If you want to look up what racism is, you can look up the dictionary definition. You can look at these legitimate instances online. You can understand what defunding the police means. You can understand all of it because it's literally available at our fingertips. So I think that's something that's really special. But this kind of moves us on to our next question, which is, how has the world of Black activism or BIPOC activism in general shifted in the past 5 years, and how do we predict it will continue to change in the next 5 years? Yacine, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. For me, I think it has shifted in that it is more inclusive of more and more young people. Like, look at all of us here, pretty young people, right? So we've been at we've increasingly seen more young people leading Black activist movements and just driving the future that we deserve as young people. And I think that it has also, like I previously said, included many voices and many identities. Because when we talk of Black activism, it's important to recognize how just being part of another identity that is already marginalized can affect your experience of racism. So Black activism now recognizes that and kind of incorporates that within its demand, within how it would like society to move on forth in this fight for race to eliminate racism. And it has increasingly been able to take systems and their ways of operation and just flip them on their heads, right? So to say the least, it has simply just achieved a lot. And as a result of the work we are doing today is founded upon work that has been done so many years back. I think that in 5 years' time, Black activism will look different. I'm hopeful that when we talk of Black activism in 5 years' time, that we will not have to say defund the police, that we will not have to continuously explain why we must invest in housing. And society will just come to realize that, the work of Black activism is not what is bold, it's not what is to be tiptoed around, but it's just advocating for basic human rights, for the respect, the inclusion, and just accepting of the reality of racism, and accepting that as BIPOC communities, we have what it takes to make a change, and that society just needs to hop on board with us. So it's also, to me, important that in 5 years' time, society recognizes that these BIPOC communities must be valued, and that in 5 years' time, I hope that we will no longer have to, explain why BLM, why such and such an activism, because, it's going to be evident the ways in which our systems are founded upon flaws, right? And until the way that they have come to restrict and silence BIPOC communities is corrected, we will never truly be able to say that all lives matter. So in 5 years' time, I'm just hopeful that, the straightforward things will no longer have to be explained.
No, definitely. And I think you're touching on something very, very important of normalizing the conversation around racism. Like, I don't know how many times I've been in school and someone would say something racist and it was like, hush, hush, like no one wanted to touch it. And you're the one person that's like, well, that's racist. But normalizing this culture of everybody calling out these instances of obvious, blatant, but also covert forms of racism. And I think that's something that's very important that we are starting to really work towards. Vijanti, do you want to add stuff to this?
So what I've seen change in Black activism is that the use of video. So now, like Zachariah was saying, everyone is on their phone. It's a pandemic. Well, we're also ingesting a lot of video. So if that's on Netflix, now I'm seeing documentaries coming up on Netflix that can really help tell the Black history story in North America. And it's talking about, why people talk about defunding the police because of, transitioning, this documentary called 13th, which is about their 13th Amendment and how there's like a loophole. If you become a criminal, then you're going to be incarcerated. And that labor that used to be slavery is now labor in the prison system. So, and that may be American, but who is watching American films? Everyone around the world, including Canada. So just that kind of, the use of video is very powerful. And I see that as helping on multiple fronts. So now there are free courses on equity and inclusion and diversity that you can, the university, I think it's Colorado, has one that you can do online for free. And it includes video, it includes, podcasts. And so you can inform yourself very easily and with no cost. And I think that's really helping everyone inform themselves and be able to communicate better about all of these issues. So moving ahead, I think that like this discussion has been happening earlier in the United States because they have a more open communication. And yeah, some things are more blatant, but it's been a conversation going on for maybe 10 years and it's newer in Canada. So I'm hoping in 5 years' time, all that education, we will be able to move forward because people will all have the same background in knowing the history to move forward to the future on human rights in general.
And I think what you were saying about, you know, the knowledge and the education being so readily accessible for everyone, I'm like, it's not too far off for us to say in 5 years time, we are learning about slavery, oppression, discrimination in our educational institutions and reforming these institutions to no longer benefit students from a particular background, but treat all students equitably and give Black students the education on their history, but also educating white students on the history, because so often students are like, well, you know, slavery and racism had happened, but we're beyond that. But educating them about how this was actually built within our society and putting that from a young age into our institutions for students. Zachariah?
So again, like, I think that one thing that's really like helped shift it is social media within like the last 5 years. You know, it's really brought like the Black communities worldwide like together. Our stories are being like told a lot easier. It's a lot easier to access it, and you know, it's just like it's creating more movements because again, like with the George Floyd incident, everybody's paying attention, and just like you said, both of you touched up like with such easy access to get like all this education, it's people are starting to become more educated, and like with that, it's like it's easier to have the harder conversation because like you know sometimes if you go to have it with some people and they really don't know anything, it's almost like talking to a wall. But now with people starting to understand a little bit more, having that access, and you know, just like it's just being everywhere, people are a little bit more open. They're a little bit more like they're absorbing it, and they're able to kind of see it a little bit easier. And you know, I'm hoping like in the next 5 years, like you said it perfectly. I'm hoping that at one point that with all this like information, it's going to cause enough of a change that you know the curriculums are all going to change, that we're going to be learning about our history, we're going to be learning about like other like people of color history, right? Like for instance, it was only until a few years ago before Viola Desmond even got voted for the $10 bill that I'd even know who she was, right? And it was only until last year that I even heard about Africaville. And so it's like as a Black Canadian, there's such a little history that we know or that we're taught that unless we go elsewhere, we're not going to get. So I'm hoping, and I can see that going because, you know, people are more eager to learn, that in 5 years that these difficult conversations again are going to just be normalized. People are going to stand up against racism. And, you know, when, like you said, when you went to school, people aren't going to just go hush, hush. They're going to be like, hey, you can't do that, right? And it's going to be more of an accepting and understanding community because, again, we know more.
Exactly. No, I definitely agree. Pitia?
So the world of Black activism has shifted for the better in the past 5 years because of the spotlight on it, because of the events and everything that's been going on through the past like 5 years and longer, being recorded and posted online for everyone to see. And Black activism, what I've seen is I've seen a growing awareness of just racism, profiling, and stereotyping that's been going on. And so this awareness, it helps increase the attention of Black voices, which helps push forward Black activism acknowledgement at the forefront in the news, in educational institutions, the workplace, and even in the community. And also in the past 5 years, Black activism has grown in size throughout the world. And in the Black community, what I'm seeing is like there's way more Black leaders are stepping out and speaking and taking action when it comes to social changes for the long overdue injustices the Black community has faced on a regular basis. And people are starting to engage in those uncomfortable conversations about racism more, as well as more education about just Black lives in general. And in the next 5 years, um, as someone said before, like I hope like Black history and acting and just speaking about racism is just normalized. And I hope that more organizations and associations will be formed through Black activism, which will create better support systems for the community as a whole and will create more comfortable spaces where people from the Black community can go for just like mental rehabilitation, to receive guidance, or just organizations that give more people opportunities in various different fields, which will all help the community grow, feel uplifted, create a positive cycle being passed down, which helps the youth have a stronger foundation.
No, and I just have to say, you all are coming across incredibly eloquently, and I'm so glad to be sharing this space with you. And I think that's something that we are kind of touching on is, you know, the intersectionality of our work first and foremost, because, you know, Black Lives Matter supporting, you know, queer lives matter and BIPOC lives matter. And it's one of those things where, you know, in unity, there's strength, and we are not free until we are all free type thing. And I think it's just something so beautiful. And the notion that hopefully someday, hopefully this is something within the 5 years where us as activists, as people of color, we will be believed when we discuss our lived experiences. You know, I'm sure we've all experienced it where you would say, this racist incident happened to me, or for the women on this panel, this sexist thing, this misogynist thing happened towards me, and people are like, that's not what happened. And, you know, people don't believe you as a person of color, but hopefully that we're moving towards this place in society where I no longer, as a Black woman, have to say this happened and have a white man say the exact same thing in order for it to believe, where my word as a Black woman means just as much as a white man's word or a white person's word. And like, we are truly actually valued with our space in this community, but also that we are recognized for the work that we are doing. So I just want to commend everyone for that, because we are doing incredible work here. And I know often it feels like people don't listen to us, but we're doing incredible things and we are making strides in our community. And I think that's something that's really important. So I'm going to jump to another question because we started touching on this a lot, but then we'll jump back to the other few ones. But what does a racism-free community look like? You know, we're kind of starting to touch on little pieces here and there, but like, what does it actually look like for everyone's point of view? Yacine, what do you think?
Sure. I always get excited about this question because just in speaking about it, I feel good that it's something that we can achieve. You know, like you said, Rana, we're doing so great. Like, we're doing so great. And people after us will continue to do great until we achieve what we need to achieve. You know, this is a movement. Black activism has been going on for so long. For me, a racism-free community will be one where all people, identities, backgrounds are included, valued, and respected. And voices and experiences of marginalized communities will not simply be heard, but like I said, they will be listened to. They will not be just seen as being present, but they will be acknowledged within the community. And their needs of these communities will be tended to in order to place them at the, and their needs will be tended to, and then they will be placed at the forefront in that realization. And for me, one thing that's important in a racism-free community is the restructuring of our systems. I'm very hopeful that a racism-free community will not be based on our current systems. Our systems will be restructured to correct its flawed foundation and its disservice to our communities. And truly then will I be able to say, we are racism-free, and I'm very hopeful for that. I truly am.
No, I definitely agree. And Sandy Hudson has a very interesting quote. I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly, but she says something to the effect of, you know, the idea of breaking the table and rebuilding it, because, you know, so frequently everyone's like, I want a seat at the table. And so our quote basically is talking about the idea of breaking this table, and we need to rebuild it because, I mean, I said it once before when we had a city council meeting, they were like, well, we should have more Black people on this police board or on this board for representation. And I said, well, thank you, but no thanks. We don't want a seat at your racist table. Thank you. Like, the table's already predispositioned to, you know, not benefit us and put us in a place where nobody's listening to us, where we're not taken seriously. So I definitely agree with that we have to restart with the restructuring of our institutions and the foundations of our society. And that's where we can truly start to see this racism-free community. Vijanti?
Yes, I agree with all of that. That, you know, people need to look at life with a different lens. They need to look at all of these policies in a different way. So for us, we have a mandate that we wrote, and we see a racism community where everyone actively shares the responsibility for removing barriers to equity and inclusion for all. So every individual will be able to equally contribute to society, economically, politically, socially, culturally. So how I see that is, like we will be represented in art around. There will be more celebrations for everyone's cultural activities, and there will be more sharing circles where we can share, talk about our shared history and humanness. And that's how we will move forward on making changes, because we will recognize the other is ourselves. More partnerships, like you said, Rana, like, we can't do it alone, for one, but also it needs to be equal for all, and we need to make sure all the diverse voices are there. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problems. So, having more social services and all that, having fewer microaggressions, just that's how I would see it. But yeah, we do have to just look at everything a little differently and try and see where we can make changes.
No, I definitely agree. And Vijanti, you said something so great where you were talking about the work being equitable, because I think so frequently we are told that, like, we're made to feel that the work is ours to do. As people of color, they're like, well, if you want to see a racism-free community, you do the work. And it's like, but we're just fighting for our lives at this point. We're trying to just get an equitable platform for us. So it's really important that moving forward, allies take on more of the work. And not to say that, we remove ourselves from it, but yes, elevate our voices, but also don't come to your one Black friend or BIPOC friend for every single instance of where are the resources, what is this, where is this, do the research yourself and educate your friends and your family. There's been instances where I've been in a group of white friends, someone will say something racist and everyone just goes silent. And I'm like, oh, so it's up to the Black person to then address the situation. But, for allies, step up and, participate in this discourse as well, because racism, it might not affect us in the same way, but it's definitely affecting all of us in different ways. But Zachariah?
So to me, like, a racism-free community would basically be like where everyone is understood, right? So like, again, it would have to start with like the education and everything being taught, but like there's no like discrimination against one another, like just due to like the race. And like, again, people have to like take the moment to learn, understand, and like properly like educate themselves to like not want to like denounce or not want to like constantly be like that. And it's like people need to start like publicly like denouncing it more like in public, right? So it's like you were saying, it shouldn't just be up to us, right? Like, again, for me, I was in the exact same boat. Like I went to a school, 1,500 students, and I think there were 10 Black kids. So like, every single time there was something ever said, like people would just like go really quiet and they'd look at me and it's like, oh, okay, so I guess like I got to deal with it. Or it's like, another thing is like, it just like, I wanted to, where Black History Month isn't just, it feels like it's a chore, where it's like, it could be like a celebration, right? And it shouldn't just be like, it's just within that certain time frame, right? Where everybody is taught everything all the time. It's just like people are looking for change, and like they're just like constantly like interacting. They're constantly like trying to like have a better understanding on like other people's like lives and like experiences and everything. So yeah, that's it for me. Like, yeah.
No, so well said. And I think you touched on when you mentioned Black History Month and, saying it as a chore. And I definitely agree, because like Black History Month was created as something, to kind of be like, well, we're going to give you this 1 month to talk about your history, and then we're just never going to talk about it for the rest of the year. And I think as much as Canada has so much work to do, I think something that they did well this year was the theme for Black History Month was Black futures and like Afrofuturism and that whole notion. And a lot of people have been referring to Black History Month as Black Futures Month. And I think it's one of those things where, in a racism-free society, Black History Month is Black Futures Month, because we're learning Black history in our educational systems. Now we're talking about Afrofuturism, we're talking about these future strides and talking about ongoing excellence. And it's not one of those things where Black History Month rolls around again and, the schools like, let's rehash everything that Martin Luther King Junior did, and let's talk about this, but we're not going to talk about everything because we don't want to scare people, but we're going to talk about these 5 key things that we talk about every year. But actually having meaningful Black History Month celebrations and recognitions, and I think that's something really important, and which is part of the ideas for this caucus, is really recognizing that and then having the conversations around it. And while the past is important, we're not always talking about the past, but look at these incredible things that are happening at the same time. And, you know, also recognizing our Canadian history, because I'll be honest, in my educational past, they never once taught us anything about Canadian Black history in the slightest. So definitely that. Pitia?
Yeah, so a racism-free community, to me, it looks like a community that is able to communicate with one another without any feeling of discomfort because of the color of a person's skin. A community where people feel accepted and everyone is encouraged to participate in various things, and there's a lack of walls and barriers on people, and just a community where people will stand up for each other in all different kinds of situations and different kinds of environments. And it's also a community where I see it as a community where people are judged. People should be judged based on their character and their actions, and never from the color of their skin. And I see the community being this type of community being a very evolved community economically, because of the ability for people to have unity amongst each other, which will lead to more thriving individuals, businesses, etc. And even more innovation would commence in this type of community, because people wouldn't be discriminative and would actually be open to listening to each other, bringing together different perspectives, designs, ideas, and proposals for just overall community success.
No, definitely. Thank you for that. So the next question that we're going to kind of go to, because I know a lot of times people don't know what we hear the word activism, people are like, what does activism actually look like, especially in the Northern context? So the next question for our panelists we're going to talk about is, what currently is the focus of your work, you know, in terms of activism, in terms of fighting systemic injustices, and what is the next works for your organization or for yourself as an individual? So what are you doing now? What are your intentions for the future? Where do you want to go with this? I think this is a really awesome question to answer, because it's exciting, and to share with everyone what is in the works for you. Yacine, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm along with Black, I'm also part of the BLM Sabri chapter. So we all know what that's looking like currently, because we're all here. So I'm gonna talk about what we're doing with WAXA, because our work there looks kind of different, because we are a university-based association, right? So we are all for the integration of African and Caribbean communities within the city of Greater Sudbury. We are looking to collaborate with more and more associations that do the work of Black activism and that create an awareness on BIPOC communities. And we also work to promote the African and Caribbean culture. And we also promote our communities within the city of Sudbury, because they are doing a lot of great work. And we kind of provide a platform for that to be recognized. So in our awareness creation, we basically create a space where, a learning space where we place in our positions to share and teach, and at the same time to learn as well, because Laurentian is increasingly attracting more and more diverse student population, and so is the city of Greater Sudbury. So in providing these learning spaces, we kind of weave together all our commonalities. I think Vijanti and Zachariah kind of touched on that. We need to look at what we have in common rather than just focalize on our differences. And also in terms of differences, we look at those barriers and those differences and kind of look at ways we can transgress them, not in a sense to be common, but in a sense where we place ourselves in a position to accept that we will never all be the same, but we shall always respect that we are different. So yep, that's what we do with LACSA.
Nice. And I think something important for us to recognize that you said yes in is so frequently in the fight against racism, you hear why are things always black and white, or why is it always black versus white? And I just want to say here, not full stop, clearly, it is not about black versus white. It is about racist versus anti-racist. You are either anti-racist, actively anti-racist, or you are racist, period. That is how it is. It's not about the color of your skin or where you are coming from. It's about you if you are fighting against these systemic injustices, and that is what the fight for all of this is about. So I just want to make that clear, because I know a lot of times people have a hard time swallowing that. We're not here to attack. We are here to change the institutions and foundations. We are here to fight for our lives. And big ups to Luaxa. Like, I just want to say, Yacine, your group is doing amazing work, and they're always doing like panels and discussions, which is really great for cultivating these discussions, which I love so much. Vijanti?
So Equity Inclusion North Bay has gotten different organizations around to talk about all of these issues. And what we have done is we want to be, we could help participate in focus groups or be an advisory role, but we made 3 requests of the City of North Bay, and so far 2 have been met. There is a proclamation that states that the year 2021 is the year of equity and inclusion, and in that proclamation, it describes some of, the Human Rights Commission's definitions of, racism and in our charter, and so so there's a background to people knowing, what to expect in Canada. And secondly, we asked that a city councillor joined our sector committee. So we do have a city councillor, and we also asked the city consider joining a coalition of inclusive municipalities. So once you join that coalition, there are a lot of resources for each municipality to learn, how to celebrate certain things, or, what policies to put in place. So currently there's a report being written by city staff for them to make a decision on joining. So what we wanted to celebrate Black History Month, and we put out some information, and there wasn't as much uptake as we wanted. I think again that people are not comfortable yet. So we want to move towards doing more education so that people will become comfortable. We also have unforeseen positive circumstances. So one of the city councillors offered to mentor new city councillors so that there could be more diversity on our city council. So other than that, there's also now a new support group in town for Black and Brown people that's starting up like today. So we never know where our activism is going to end up, but it's nice that people are having ideas and they're coming together and forming good partnerships to move everything, to that racism-free, discrimination-free future.
No, definitely. I think that sounds so beautiful. And I love the idea of like healing groups and healing spaces for people to connect. It's so beautiful and so magical, really. And I just love the part that you said, we don't know where activism is going to take us. And it's so true, because activism work is a day-to-day thing. We'll plan something like weeks in advance, but before that, 10 other actions will pop up. So it's important to know that this work we do is incredibly on the fly. So it's like some of the most flexible and like ever-changing folks are in activism, and it's so magical, and I love that. Zachariah?
To start off, I would totally agree with that, because like that's how this all started for myself, and I know Pitia as well. Just was all on the fly, and once we were in, it just took off, and we're like, you know what, this is kind of fun. I like it, I enjoy it, and it's good to like help make change. But for us right now, like we're more focused on like education and everything. So like currently we have a scholarship started off at our alma mater, like school board. So it's like we provided bursaries, so 2 bursaries, one for each of like the schools, $500 for an Afro-Caribbean student, like a visual, so like that's a visual student, and they get like through the opportunities of just like being within the school, and like if they're within their board, and just being an activist within the community as well. This is just like to inspire, like that knowledge is power, right? And like that going like through school and everything is like the best way and the best route. And I don't want to go too much into it because I know Pitia is also involved, so I'll let him go as well. But like I know for us to expand, we eventually do want to get into more of the boards and everything. And it's like, again, we've only been at this for like 6 months, but we're trying to get this bigger. And like previously said, we never know where this is going to go. But as long as we're going in the right direction, that's all that matters. So, but I'll let Pitia kind of touch more on the rest of it.
No, that was great. Thank you. Yeah, Pitia, go ahead.
Yeah, so similar to what Zach was saying, like the current focus is to continue to spread awareness and make people more knowledgeable about what the Black community faces and things that go untalked about and social injustices in general, just through different kinds of events that are possible. And as he was talking about, just supporting the youth in the community and providing them with resources, role models that look like them, and being just an inspiration. Like Zach was touching on, for example, like the scholarship, Zachariah and I were able to put ourselves in a position where we were able to make an award possible for the high schools we previously attended in Thunder Bay. And yeah, as he said, the scholarship award is called the Black Excellence Award. And so basically with this scholarship, we want to give people just the sense of like there's people that are there that want to see you do better, that want to see your future go in the right path, and just for people just to feel as though they could even do something like this or even greater than this. Because if I think about myself, if I was in a position as a high school student and I saw someone just like a few years older making like a scholarship award like this, I'd feel pretty inspired. I'd feel like, okay, if someone that looks like me, a little bit older than me, could do something like that, I could do something like that and even better. And I think that just causes like a ripple effect onto just people in the city and anyone else that just gets a hold of it, just because of how big technology is. If it gets posted on technology, people in other communities and other cities will just see that and it'll spread. But just continuing to push the correct narratives and create a more positive and safer environment for my community, for the future, and for their futures as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said it so perfectly. Activism is contagious. You know, you see somebody else do and you're like, I can do that. This is how it can happen. And it just grows that way. That's actually why I became involved in activism. I saw my co-president, Takara Puckett, speak at a rally and I was like, she's incredible. This is great. She's so young. I can do this. And it was just like from there. And then you start to inspire everyone to get involved. So we're going to move towards some Q&A from the audience now. And so what I'll do is I'll just ask a question, and panelists, if you want to interject, just pop in. I'll leave it more open floor. If you want to interject, you can, you don't have to. But the first question we have is from Sandy. So Sandy asks, can you speak to the history and current presence of Black people and people of color in the Canadian North? Anyone want to take it? I know it's a big question because it's hard. It's one of those things where in the educational institution, they don't actually talk a lot about it. But I mean, we had a meeting with Black Lives Matter Canada a while back, and Pascal Deverlis, one of the founders of the movement, she had said, you know, wherever there's been Black people and people of color in a community, there's been, you know, pushback and there's been difficulties and discrimination. And I know it's important that to recognize that a lot of the Black folk and are descendants of slavery, and especially from Nova Scotia, you know, because of the Underground Railroad and things like that. So it's a hard question because our history is so unknown. And I know in the North, especially, it's a lot of things have not been documented. So it's like, it's an ongoing research project for us within ourselves to uncover what exactly transpired here and who are the community leaders who have fought towards that. But does anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, so to add to that, again, it is so unknown. And it's like, I mean, it kind of like starts off with like in school, right? Like we're not really taught anything up here. And with our communities being so small, it's like we don't have a very large like Black community here, right? Like Pitia would know, like growing up, like Pitia and I have known each other for many, many, many years. And it was like if you knew one of the Black kids, you knew all of them. That's how it worked in our city, right? Like you could be driving down the street when I was younger, and it was like you could see them, and so you could see somebody and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I know that person, right? So it's like, and compared to now as it gets a little bit bigger, so it's like our history wasn't taught unless it was like from our parents, but like for me personally, my parents were like, my dad he immigrated from Somalia, right? So like a lot of my history, I really didn't know, and it was more so I had to be taught it, and it's at times it's kind of like it's iffy because people aren't really like sure, and it's really difficult because it's like it seems as if like Canadian history is really kind of like put it underneath the rug, and it's like to dive in. So I guess it's like personally it's a challenge to like try to understand more on like the current situation and like the previous like situations. So
No,
like a really hard
definitely.
question, right? So
Yeah, Vijanti, go ahead.
I'm going to put a shout out to Dr. Amadou Ba. You're going to have him speak in some of the other panels. And he just put out a book called A Forgotten History, the significant contribution of Black slaves and soldiers to the building of Canada. So that's a resource we can use, but just in our area, for instance, like in Mattawa, there's a story. So that is that Dr. Modesty moved there and eventually became a mayor. So it's really at this time we should be sharing all those stories. We don't know enough of the stories. So it's nice that we can speak to the fact that that's a gap that we need to address.
No, definitely. Yeah, Pitia, go ahead.
Yeah, for honestly, just looking at the question, it's actually just sad to think about, like, when you think about Black, like, Canadian history, you just can't, like, not everyone could just, like, jump out and just think of a bunch of different things because of just the way that the school systems are formed. And it just shows that there needs to be some sort of reconstructing that education, because there's not many things I learned about Black history in school. From just doing my own personal research, I was able to learn about different things, and it always made me think, like, why aren't we learning these things in school? But we're learning about all the other types of histories into depth, and it just shows, like Ashley was saying, like there's a big gap in there, and I think just over time, like we just have to work on ways that we can close this gap and just create just have a thriving just a community that's just knowledgeable about just Black history, the positives, the negatives, the trailblazers and such.
Exactly, definitely.
I
Yacine?
wanted to add something. I've been pretty quiet because I didn't grow up in Canada, so I couldn't really speak to that Black Canadian experience. But this kind of resonates with a lot of the work that BLM and WAXA, right, Rihanna wants to do, and in which we are recognizing that, there's a gap when it comes to the academic system and their teachings of the Black Canadian history. So for us, WAXA, most of our members are of African and Caribbean origins. Most of our members are knowledgeable on African and Caribbean history. So it is something that we're looking into to provide our young brothers and sisters in high schools and middle schools and even elementary schools, these presentations, let them know that, hey, we see you and it's okay to be someone like you up in the North, right? Your experiences is valid, and where you're from, you're a king and you're a queen. So it really resonates with me that we're having this conversation, and for sure, this is the direction that BLM and WAXA will come to take in a short amount of time. So stay on the lookout for that.
Of course. Thanks, Yacine. All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. So we're going to try to get through as many questions as we have, as we can in the next little bit. So Monique asks, how do we ensure BIPOC activists in smaller, more isolated communities in Northern Ontario are safe and get support they need for the work that they do? And what is the role of allies in keeping them safe? Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, in the experience from BLM in terms of allies, we always use allies to communicate with police, but I mean, specifically Black Lives Matter, we do not work with the police. So when police are present, we would have a white ally deal with that, because generally speaking, if for those who are on the policing panel, police treat white people differently, plain and simple. So it's already, we don't want to have a marginalized folk interacting with them. So that's a really good role for allies. And also, I mean, in terms of like rallies and marches in the United States, I'm sure we've seen, you know, where white allies will use their bodies as shield because police are less likely to harm them and affect them. So that's something. And it's one of those things where, you know, safety in numbers, you know, if you're going to do a rally or a demonstration or something, go with your friends, go with a larger group, go with, you know, when we mobilize together. And that is something that's really kept us very safe when we do things, because I mean, there's been numerous rallies. We're here in Sudbury, for folks who know how the city's laid up. There's the Bridge of Nations where we just like walk in the road on the Bridge of Nations. We're taking this space. This is BLM space today. And you best believe that was 3 people would not have ended the same versus when we were a crowd of 60 people. So it's also understanding the capacity of the work that you can do with the numbers that you have, because there are very safe direct actions and rallies and marches and things that we can do with particular amount of numbers. So just recognizing that, and recognizing that how, especially as organizers, how can we keep visual how can we visually keep track of everybody who's participating in this organization, you know, in terms of sharing information, having that core inner group you're going to share information with, and not making things so widespread dependent on what you're doing. So it's just like, it's one of those things. So does anyone want to add to that, or we have another question already? Cool. All right. So question 3, Jen asks, she says, thank you to all the panelists. Do you sometimes feel pressure to agree with others in the struggle, even if you might personally disagree about an approach or an issue? Can you share an example of how you disagree constructively? I think we all need to digest those lessons. These are great questions, by the way. for people who are participating, when we stop, it's like, oh, these are really good. And we just gotta like think of it. Yeah, Vijanti, go ahead.
Take an example. So I hear you that we want to work together. So that's a question of, you know, voicing a concern. But I feel that that's kind of our niche. Like, we're supposed to be voicing on behalf. Like, we can do it for what we know and our lived experiences, but hopefully, you know, it benefits more people. So for example, you know, you know, there's a conference that's being created, and you know, I think equity. We need to think, how are we honoring the lived experience and knowledge of people? You know, sometimes there's monetary, sometimes there's honorarium, sometimes there's gifts, and it's just like, you know, sometimes you have to speak up for people who may not have their time and efforts honored in the same way as other people or other experts who are coming to the table, because I don't know, are they more well known, or they have a network already, they've been doing their work longer or perceived as such. So that's kind of an example where, you know, I just think we have to have a voice, whether the decision is made differently, you know, whatever the case may be. I think this is the time where we're all learning to have our voice. You know, just that's really the point of diversity here, is to have all these different voices, and then as a group to hopefully come to some consensus.
No, definitely. And in terms for white allies, just like a little point to add, other constructive ways you can become involved in the movement. First of all, give a platform and safe space for BIPOC individuals to have the floor, to take the space to share their experiences. Because remember, first and foremost, it's not about you. It is not about you. So it's about, even if you are an ally and you support the movement, not speaking on behalf of the movement. So giving them this space, calling people in, not out, which is really important, because call out culture can be incredibly dangerous, because if you call out people, a lot of times they just become more deeply seated in racism, and they see less validity in the movement. And as terrible as it is, we often have to prove the use of the movement to people, because that's how change is sustained, unfortunately. So I think that's a really good thing for us to note. Yeah, Pitia, go ahead.
Yeah, so for that question, for question number 3, before, but I wouldn't say not now, I feel pressure to agree with situations like that. Like the more that I've been doing this type of work, I've been having more these like difficult conversations and just posting about it and just speaking about it to other people. It feels it feels it doesn't feel hard. I don't feel pressure to disagree um, with somebody else's point. And like for an example, Instagram posts about just like uncomfortable things that people usually wouldn't have conversations about. I'd be DM'd by people via Instagram and they would disagree with a point. And I found like in order to be able to disagree with someone like constructively and have like a conversation, you just have to look at it with just an open perspective and just try to kind of put yourself in that person's shoes. Because when you just let your just ego get in the way, then you just kind of block off what they're saying and you just don't become an active listener. You kind of just become like subjective and you try to just look for points that people say, that points that people that you assume that they're going to say, so you're just looking just to rebuttal. But I find that if you disagree with someone and you're having the conversation, just trying to see what their perspective is and then give your perspective and then trying to find a middle ground. And then I believe once you find that middle ground and you can agree with some points, you can continue off there.
No, definitely.
And I would just like to add something on that. Finding that middle ground is so important. So Jen asked, do you sometimes feel the pressure to agree with others in the struggle, even if you might personally disagree about an approach or an issue? So for me personally, I've never had an instance where I felt pressured to agree with something, because if my experiences doesn't allow me to agree, if my understanding doesn't allow me to agree, I simply don't agree. But I will then try to find ways, why do I not agree? What is in this that I do not agree with, and why do they agree? And then just finding a middle ground, because sometimes agreeing and disagreeing is simply just about a lack of education on the subject matter. And me being, my identity as an African and my identity as an American born in the US, sometimes they simply don't mix. Sometimes I'm just either African or I'm just either American. But sometimes in my ability to do work with BLM, that's where they mix, because I'm able to understand African, are members of the African Caribbean community who are immigrants to Canada. And I'm also able to understand, our Canadian folks who grew up in Canada and understand the different reasons and for which they agree with certain things when it comes to Black activism and when they don't, because our experiences are different, our focuses are different. So for me, sharing an example how you disagree constructively. For example, straight up, working with police, for example. Sudbury, we have a lot of African Caribbean associations, and we have BLM. And it's just like, when it comes to working with police, there's friction, and that's completely fine, right? Because we all take different approaches to the activism work we do. We all have different mandates, and that's completely fine. But for us, we still, regardless, are able to work together. There's some areas we are able to and some areas which we are not, and that's fine. That's where the middle ground is. We just simply understand and put ourselves, like Vijanti said earlier, place yourself in the other person's shoe, and that you recognize you recognize yourself as being the other person, right? And then we can truly move forth in that, we respect our ways we address racism and Black activism.
Definitely. So we have just about 5 minutes left. So we're going to do one last question. Throw in your last thoughts. This is we got 2 last questions. Okay, I'll read the last 2 questions and answer both, answer one or the other, but we got 5 minutes left. We're going to try to jazz through this. So the first question that we have is, as a white person, how can I support BIPOC/BLM without acting as or being perceived as the white hero? I want to help, but I don't know where to begin without unintentionally being offensive. And then the other one is, when it comes to the movement in Canada, it was mentioned that some people, especially white folks, view the situation with racism in Canada as not as bad in America, as a deflection tactic. Has this been an added challenge for BLM movements in Canada, and how do we overcome it? Last 2 questions. We got about 5 minutes. Yeah, Zachariah, go ahead.
So I'll answer the first one. I guess like, to ensure that you're not like doing something like unintentionally offensive, ensure like if you're trying to be educated, right? Like just ensure that you're listening, right? Don't be just listening for points. That way you're like, oh, I'm gonna go do this just because it looks good for the gram, right? I'm doing this because it's like for the right, movements, right? And I guess like, if you're gonna be attacked as being perceived as a white hero, I guess that's maybe kind of the backlash you're gonna get, right? Like it's gonna maybe, and I've definitely seen it. Like I've had some friends where they've had like their family even like question them and stuff like that, and it's like, well, you know what? It's more so, don't see yourself as a white hero. See yourself as just kind of like you're shedding light on the problem, right? And like just constantly just be doing that, right? Because like if you want change to happen, you're gonna get backlash because like for change, like not a lot of people like change, right? And if you keep doing that, yeah, I don't want to keep going too much because I know the others are gonna go.
To add on to that, I can simply say that depending on where you are, for example, here in Sudbury, a lot of associations do a lot of discussions, a lot of workshops, a lot of information sessions. And Vijanti mentioned an online free online training, right? You have so many resources. It's just about just looking into. If you don't know where to start, just Google allyship training, allyship resources, and you'll find so much. And just sometimes don't feel afraid to just approach those associations through a DM. Hey, I'm trying to find out more. Do you have resources for me? And also, if you would like to become an ally, BLM, for example, has allies. So if you would like to work with an ally to understand their process of becoming an ally, you could also do that. So, social media, like Pitia is telling us, it's contagious and you have all the answers there. So yeah, and to go into the second question, the racism or situation of racism not being as bad in Canada, one thing I've noticed that for one, and for me, it's just like, just because it's not as bad does not mean it's not bad. And just because it's not as bad and as open as the US, we are like this with the US, right next door neighbors, right? So every political issue kind of resonates in a way back to Canada, right? So in a sense, just because it's not as bad doesn't mean that it's not bad. And just because it's not as bad doesn't mean that it's not something to be addressed. And it doesn't mean that BIPOC communities are not being affected by the rate of racism is being, the rate at which racism is being perpetrated in our northern communities. So just kind of placing yourself in a position, yes, okay, it may not be that bad, but what is it of racism and how is it affecting BIPOC communities in the North? And once you ask yourself that, you will find that you will learn why racism is present in Canada and in which ways and how we can combat that.
Exactly. So we have about 2 minutes left. Vijanti, Pitia, any last thoughts?
So there's a lot of great points that were said for question number 4, but just continuing just to use like the resources, because we have just resources just by just even being at home. We just have all everything we could use just online, just resources, and finding out different ways in order to be an ally. And also even just reaching out just to BIPOC and BLM, just like leaders within your community, just even asking them just like, oh, what can I do in order to support you? Because I think that they'll have like a lot of good and like constructive ideas for you. And for question number 5, I see, from how I see this is, people do use that as like a deflection, but at the end of the day, even if just saying that it's not as bad as America, racism shouldn't even exist in general, like regardless, even if it isn't as bad. I'm not saying it's not, but it shouldn't even exist regardless. And and how we could overcome this is just by having these uncomfortable conversations. Because one thing I learned that you can use this in just all aspects, just in life, in sports, in all different situations, is in order for you to be able to grow, like you have to be able to put yourselves in uncomfortable situations. And being in uncomfortable situations is how you're able to just expand your horizon, just in all different aspects.
No, definitely. Vijanti, any last thoughts?
No, I thought that was beautifully put. So yeah, usually that's just when they talk about it's worse in the US, that's just to close the door. They're not ready to talk about it. But yes, like Pitia is saying, and Yacine, just give some more examples maybe. Like right now we're in a pandemic. Look, who's being more affected at the moment. You know, there are a lot of BIPOC folks who are being more affected detrimentally. So, you know, it's up to you to decide if you want to combat it, if it's worth it. That's the problem. Because we always have to make that decision. Are we going to take the time to educate in that moment? Or maybe we can say, well, you should look into this and this, and just leave it at that. It depends. But yeah, it's usually just they want to close the door on the subject.
Definitely. So that is our time. I would like to thank all of our panelists for participating. Thank you to all of the attendees. Stay tuned for our next panel. Let me be perfectly clear about the Northern Queer experience. One last thought to end on, friends. Your BIPOC friends are not your resources. It is exhausting for us to constantly get messages being, what book should I read? The internet is there. The resources are at our fingertips. Use the internet, and change starts from within. Change starts from within our community. We can only stop racism if we are all actively anti-racist. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you so very much. And I hope you stick around for the rest of the panels. Enjoy the rest of the caucus. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you to all our panelists for cultivating such an exciting discussion. I sincerely hope that everyone enjoyed themselves. As a reminder, keep an eye open for our follow-up survey and an opportunity to be entered for a chance to win a prize pack of items showcasing the beautiful art of our caucus artist, Sonia Couture-Katimi. After a brief break, we will be back with Let Me Be Perfectly Clear, the Northern Queer Experience at 3 p.m. For Northern Caucus information, please consult our virtual event booklet and stay tuned to our social media. Thank you again to our sponsors, Cambrian College, Canadian Mental Health Association Sudbury Manitoulin, Centre de Santé Communautaire du Grand Sudbury, Centre Victoria pour Femmes, Collège Boréal, Galerie du Nouvel-Ontario, Greater Sudbury Public Library, Laurentian University Université Laurentienne, Public Health Sudbury and Districts, Réseau Access Network, Société Alzheimer's Society, Sudbury Action Center for Youth, Thornhill University Women's Gender Sexuality Studies Department. And remember, Here to Stay Baby is not only the header of this event, but a battle cry for marginalized communities residing in Northern Ontario. Our lives have value, we belong, we are here to stay, baby. Thank you for joining us and have a splendid rest of the day.